This program is brought to you by Emory University.
This program is brought to you by the Emory University Center for Ethics.
My name is Jessica Caldas. I'm an Atlanta-based artist. I'm primarily a printmaker. As a printmaker, what I make are monoprints, which means they're like one-offs, unlike most printmaking, which is editioned and repeated, and then you kind of have duplicates. Monoprints are kind of more like paintings, like only one exists. And I layer these kind of various printmaking techniques on top of each other, which I think really lends itself well to layered narratives that I'm trying to really illustrate. Print is really something you can only engage so far with. It's on the wall, it's flat, there's not really much physical interaction. So I started playing with different kinds of installation. I created these books that people could flip through that had all this language in them, and anything that can kind of give people a tactile way to just touch or feel or really think about where they sit in relationship to whatever issue I'm talking about is probably in some ways more valuable than looking at a print. And that to me creates, well really it doesn't create, it sort of destroys this barrier that sometimes happens when you're looking at something on a wall that's flat. And I think the layered narratives have their own power, but when I'm really trying to discuss something larger, if somebody can really physically be in it, there's something that makes them a little bit closer to the issue then. And so I'm really trying to push that further. I'm doing these wheat paste murals, I'm doing chalk drawings, I'm doing wallpaper pieces that cover the entire wall in a room, and using whatever mediums make sense. I did recently an installation that actually included shredded temporary protective orders, which are what domestic violence survivors get if they're trying to save, protect themselves. It's like a restraining order. And I shredded, 1,000 of them and just filled this small space with them. And that was what people had to walk through, which I thought was an interesting way to think about where we sit in this place. But I have recently begun exploring installation, public artworks, and community engaged projects here in Atlanta. And my work primarily deals with people's stories and sort of how they grow and change over time, but also how those personal, very personal stories relate to larger social issues that affect communities and individuals, and sort of the relationship between those stories, the larger issues, and the kind of way they interact together. My work as an artist is primarily driven by what I do and engage with in my everyday life. I am an advocate, and I work with domestic violence victims and volunteer with various organizations that do work around a lot of the issues my art deals with. That work was really what started my engagement artistically with these kinds of personal narratives that kind of tell the stories of very difficult and challenging issues. What I'm driven by and what I really believe in is that people's personal stories provide a way for others to access issues that they normally would disengage from. People tend to, when they're thinking about something difficult like domestic violence or sexual assault, they tend to say, well, that's not me, that would never happen to me, that happens to other people. And that othering is something that I really am struggling with and struggling to sort of counteract in my work. I use these very personal stories from other people or myself, or sort of just an issue in general that I've engaged with, and I think that people see that visually, it's accessible, it becomes something that they understand and they kind of mirror in themselves, and that I think is really powerful in a way for people to, understand an issue better, access it, and maybe even challenge themselves in the ways they think about it. So as an artist, I've been engaging with these issues that I've never been formally trained in. And that, I've never taken any social work classes, and really my experience comes from on-the-ground work in a setting where I'm volunteering with these very difficult things and kind of taking those kinds of trainings for volunteers. So my initial concern is always do I understand this issue? Am I presenting it accurately? Is my information good, basically? And I struggle with that, but I also work very hard to educate myself. I read a lot in lots of different sources and lots of different places, and I think that's really important to me. I also, because I'm engaging directly with communities that are affected by this, I think that gives me some comfort, and I really believe that if I'm not engaging with a community that I shouldn't be making work about it. And so that's really important to me as well. Additionally, I struggle a lot with the idea of representing people's stories. This is a very well established issue in art in general, but for me, I'm not just trying to represent a person. I'm trying to represent a person and a struggle that they've dealt with, and possibly a trauma and an issue that maybe I have personal experience with, or maybe I don't. And so there's questions of, do I have the right to tell this story first? And then how am I telling this story? What ways am I sharing it, and is that appropriate? Is it respectful to the people whose story it is? Is it respectful to the issue? And that's something I constantly work around and have to negotiate. As an example, I recently did about 15 interviews with survivors of sexual assault. And it was really important to me to establish some very specific parameters while I was doing those interviews, because I'm going to be making work about those stories, but really it's the person telling it that should have the power and agency in many ways in the work that I'm making. So they have a lot of choices that they make initially when they meet with me, and even power sometimes over the final product and whether that piece or that work will be shown anywhere. And that's something I'm really continuously working with. So that is really an important kind of way I connect sort of my personal ethics and the ethics of the issues itself to the art that I'm creating.
The preceding program was brought to you by the Emory University Center for Ethics.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Emory University.